The summer of '97 was one that I'll never forget. It was a season of nostalgia and recklessness, where the world felt like it was at its most vulnerable. My family had just moved to the small town of Ravenswood, nestled deep in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. We had left behind the city life for a quieter existence, but little did we know that this new beginning would soon become our worst nightmare. The old Victorian mansion on Elm Street loomed before us, its turrets and gargoyles reaching like skeletal fingers towards the sky. My parents were thrilled with the prospect of renovating the place, but I could sense an eerie energy emanating from within its walls. It was as if the house itself was watching us, waiting for us to make our move. The local legend of Bloody Mary had long been whispered about in hushed tones, a vengeful spirit said to be summoned by a particular combination of words and actions. Some claimed she was a mere myth, but I knew better. I could feel it in my bones that we were being drawn into something sinister. As the days went by, strange occurrences began to plague us. Doors would slam shut on their own, and I'd catch glimpses of a figure out of the corner of my eye, always lurking just beyond the fringes of perception. My parents dismissed it as mere imagination, but I knew what I saw. It was then that I stumbled upon an ancient ritual hidden within the dusty pages of a forgotten book. The words Mère de Sang, etched into its cover, seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, beckoning me deeper into the heart of madness. I began to research the origins of Bloody Mary, scouring old textbooks and dusty archives for any mention of her name. It was a slow-burning obsession that consumed me, driving me to uncover the dark history behind this malevolent entity. They said she was a woman wronged by life, a victim of circumstance and fate. Her story varied depending on who told it, but one constant remained. Bloody Mary was summoned through a specific sequence of words, usually whispered in front of a mirror at exactly midnight. Some claimed that if you spoke the words 3 times, she would appear before your eyes, her face twisted in a snarl of rage and hatred. Others said that on certain nights, when the moon hung low in the sky, Bloody Mary's spirit could be conjured through the simplest of actions, splashing water on a mirror or saying a single word aloud. I was both fascinated and terrified by these tales, knowing that they seemed to be woven from the very fabric of our darkest fears. My parents grew concerned as my research intensified, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Bloody Mary's legend was more than just a myth. It was a warning, a harbinger of doom that echoed through the ages. As I delved deeper into her world, I began to notice strange symbols etched into the walls of our new home, crescent moons and pentagrams that seemed to pulse with a sinister energy. It was then that I realized I wasn't alone in my fascination with Bloody Mary's dark legacy. A presence watched me from the shadows, its eyes fixed upon mine like a cold, dead weight. It was one of those nights where the air was thick with anticipation, like a live wire humming with electricity. My parents had finally finished renovating the old mansion, and we were eager to explore its nooks and crannies. I had spent the day researching Bloody Mary's legend, but it wasn't until that night that I felt her presence stirring. As we settled into our new home, the creaking floorboards seemed to take on a sinister tone, like fingernails on a chalkboard. My parents were busy unpacking boxes and setting up furniture, but I wandered from room to room, feeling an inexplicable pull towards the attic. The air was heavy with dust and the scent of decay, and as I climbed the stairs, the shadows seemed to writhe around me like living things. In the attic, I found a trunk adorned with strange symbols, crescent moons and stars that glowed like embers in the dim light. I opened it, and a musty smell wafted out, carrying with it whispers of forgotten memories. As I rummaged through the contents, I stumbled upon an old mirror, its surface cracked and worn from years of neglect. The glass seemed to ripple, as if disturbed by an unseen hand, and for a moment I could have sworn I saw a figure standing just behind me, her face twisted in a snarl, her eyes blazing with malevolent fury. I spun around, but there was no one there. It was then that I heard the whispers. Soft at first, they grew louder until I could make out the words, "Mère de sang, Mère de sang." The voice seemed to come from all directions, echoing off the walls as it sent shivers down my spine. As I stood frozen in terror, the whispers ceased, and an unearthly silence fell upon the attic. It was as if the very air itself had been sucked out of the room, leaving me feeling hollow and exposed. And then, without warning, the mirror shattered on its own accord, shards of glass scattering across the floor like 1,000 tiny knives. I felt a presence close in around me, its icy breath sending shivers down my spine. That's when I saw it, a figure that didn't belong in this world. Tall and imposing, with eyes that burned like hot coals, it towered over me like a living specter. The poltergeist, I later learned to call it, seemed to be drawn to the mirror, its gaze fixed upon the broken glass as if it held some dark fascination for it. My parents, oblivious to the horror unfolding before them, continued their unpacking below, but I knew that I was no longer alone in this house. The poltergeist's eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a jolt of electricity run through my veins. It was then that I realized I had to get out, but as I turned to flee, I heard the sound of doors slamming shut on their own accord, trapping me in the attic with the malevolent entity. The poltergeist took a step closer, its presence suffocating me, and I knew that I was at its mercy. I tried to call for help, but my voice was trapped in my throat, unable to escape the paralyzing fear that had taken hold of me. The days that followed were a blur of terror and confusion. The poltergeist's appearances became more frequent, its actions more aggressive. I tried to avoid it, but it seemed to know my every move. It was then that I stumbled upon an ancient ritual hidden within the pages of a dusty book. The words Mère de sang, etched into its cover, seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, beckoning me deeper into the heart of madness. I knew I had to perform the ritual, to summon Bloody Mary and banish the poltergeist back to whatever realm it came from. My parents were skeptical, but I was resolute. I spent hours preparing for the ritual, gathering strange artifacts and incantations that seemed to hold the key to unlocking its secrets. The night of the ritual arrived, and I stood before the mirror, my heart pounding in my chest. I whispered the words Mère de sang 3 times, feeling the energy build within me like a tempest. And then, as if summoned by my own voice, the mirror began to ripple, its surface distorting into a maze of twisting corridors and dark, abandoned places. Bloody Mary's face appeared before me, her eyes blazing with fury and hatred. I felt a surge of adrenaline course through my veins as I realized that I was not alone in this ritual. The poltergeist had arrived, its presence swirling around me like a vortex of darkness. It spoke to me in a voice that was both ancient and evil, telling me that I would never be able to banish it back to the depths of hell. The ritual had unleashed something ancient and malevolent, something that would not rest until it had claimed my soul as its own. As the ritual came to a close, I felt a sense of unease that lingered long after the mirror's surface had returned to its normal state. It was as if Bloody Mary's presence still lingered within me, her malevolent energy seeping into my very bones. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it only intensified as the days passed. Every creak of the old wooden floorboards made me jump. Every shadow cast by a passing car seemed to take on a sinister form. My parents began to notice the change in me too, their expressions growing increasingly worried as they saw the fear and unease etched upon my face. "You're just stressed from the move," they'd say, trying to reassure me, but I knew it was more than that. The ritual had unleashed something within me, something that threatened to consume me whole. I started to feel like I was losing myself, like the darkness that had been stirred up by Bloody Mary's presence was slowly taking over. I would catch glimpses of myself in mirrors and windows, my reflection twisted into a grotesque parody of its former self. The eyes, once bright and full of life, had become sunken and dark, like two empty wells staring back at me. It was as if the poltergeist's presence had infected me, turning me into a vessel for something ancient and malevolent. I knew then that I had to find a way to exorcise Bloody Mary's influence from my life, but I wasn't sure where to start. The unsettling feeling had become a constant companion, a reminder that the darkness was always lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to pounce. I couldn't shake the feeling that Bloody Mary's presence still lingered within me. The ritual had left an indelible mark on my psyche, and I knew that I had to find a way to exorcise her influence from my life. So, on this particular night, I decided to take matters into my own hands. It was midnight, the air was thick with tension, and I felt like I was standing at the precipice of something momentous. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool breeze fill my lungs, and began to recite the words that had started it all. Mère de sang, Mère de sang. The syllables seemed to hang in the air like a challenge, daring Bloody Mary to appear once more. And then, as if summoned by my own voice, the mirror in front of me began to ripple, its surface distorting into a maze of twisting corridors and dark, abandoned places. I felt a surge of adrenaline course through my veins as Bloody Mary's face appeared before me, her eyes blazing with fury and hatred. But this time, something was different. This time, I felt like I was in control. I began to recite the words of banishment, the ancient incantations that had been passed down through generations. The words seemed to take on a life of their own, swirling around me like a vortex of light and darkness. Bloody Mary's presence faltered, her grip on my psyche weakening with each passing moment. I could feel myself slipping away from her influence, shedding the skin of fear and uncertainty that had been clinging to me for so long. And then, in an instant, it was over. The mirror's surface returned to its normal state, Bloody Mary's face disappearing into the void like a ghost vanishing into thin air. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, a sense of victory that I hadn't felt in months. But as I turned to walk away, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror one last time. The eyes were still sunken and dark, but there was something different about them now. Something almost human. As I stood there, frozen in awe at my own reflection, I began to feel a strange sensation. It was as if the boundaries between worlds were thinning, allowing for a convergence of spirits. The air seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy, and I could feel the presence of countless entities gathering around me. Some were benevolent, their intentions pure and kind. Others were malevolent, their presence dripping with malice and hatred. But it was not just these two extremes that I sensed. There were those who existed in between, beings of great power and wisdom who had walked the fine line between light and darkness for centuries. They gathered around me, their eyes fixed upon my own, as if seeking something within me. I felt a sense of trepidation, yet also a deep-seated curiosity. What did they want from me? And what secrets lay hidden within me, waiting to be uncovered? As I stood there, surrounded by this convergence of spirits, I realized that I was not alone in my journey. There were others out there, fellow travelers on the path of self-discovery and growth. And together, we could face whatever challenges lay ahead, as long as we held onto our sense of purpose and determination. The mirror seemed to be the focal point of this gathering, a nexus of energy that connected all who stood before it. And I knew that my journey was far from over. In fact, it had just begun. The spirits began to swirl around me, their forms blurring into a kaleidoscope of colors and textures. I felt myself being drawn into the vortex, as if I was being pulled towards some unknown destination. The mirror seemed to be calling to me, its surface rippling like water as it beckoned me to come closer. And with a sense of trepidation and excitement, I took my first step forward. As I stepped into the mirror's realm, I felt myself leaving behind the world I knew. The familiar landscape of reality gave way to a strange and wondrous place, full of mysteries and wonders that defied explanation. I was no longer sure what lay ahead, but I knew that I had to press on, driven by a sense of curiosity and wonder. The mirror's surface seemed to be reflecting back at me, revealing secrets and hidden truths that I had never suspected existed. I saw visions of the past and present, glimpses of events yet to come, and fragments of knowledge that had been lost for centuries. And with each passing moment, I felt myself becoming more aware, my perception of reality expanding like a blooming flower. I was no longer just a single individual, but a nexus of interconnected threads, linked to all who stood before the mirror. We were all part of a greater whole, a web of life that stretched across time and space. And in this moment, I knew that I had found my true purpose. The mirror's surface seemed to be glowing with an otherworldly light, as if it was being fueled by some inner power. I felt myself becoming one with the mirror, our energies merging like two rivers flowing into a common sea. And in this union, I discovered a sense of peace and contentment that I had never known before. The convergence of spirits had brought me to this moment, a moment of great clarity and understanding. I knew that I would never be alone again, for I was now part of a greater whole, connected to all who stood before the mirror. And with this knowledge, I felt a sense of freedom and release, as if I had finally found my true home. The mirror's surface seemed to be fading away, its light disappearing like a sunset on a summer evening. But I knew that it would always be there, waiting for me whenever I needed guidance or wisdom. For in the mirror, I had discovered a reflection of myself, a window into the soul that would forever change my life. And so, with a sense of wonder and awe, I stepped back from the mirror, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The world outside was still there, waiting for me, but I knew that I was no longer the same person who had stood before it just moments before. I had been changed by the experience, transformed by the convergence of spirits. As I emerged from the mirror's realm, I felt a sense of disorientation. The world around me seemed to have shifted and distorted, like a reflection in rippling water. I stumbled forward, my feet carrying me through the familiar streets without any sense of direction. Every step felt like a struggle, as if I was fighting against an unseen force that sought to hold me back. The sky above was a deep, foreboding gray, with clouds that seemed to twist and writhe like living things. A cold wind began to pick up, whipping my hair into a frenzy and sending shivers down my spine. I knew then that the darkness had descended upon me, its presence suffocating and oppressive. The world around me was slowly unraveling, thread by thread, as if it was being pulled apart by an invisible hand. I tried to stand tall to push against the encroaching shadows, but it was no use. The darkness was too strong, too powerful. It seemed to seep into my very bones, filling me with a sense of despair and hopelessness. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the ground, surrounded by an eerie silence. The sky was still gray, but the wind had died down, leaving behind an oppressive stillness that seemed to press against my chest. I struggled to sit up, my head spinning with dizziness and disorientation. But as I looked around, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure stood before me, its face twisted into a grotesque grin. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and its presence seemed to fill the air with a malevolent energy. I knew then that I was in the clutches of something ancient and evil, something that had been awakened by my journey through the mirror's realm. And as I gazed into those glowing eyes, I felt my very soul begin to unravel. As I gazed into those glowing eyes, I felt my soul beginudo unravel. The figure began to laugh, a sound that was like nothing I had ever heard before. It was as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart, revealing an abyss of madness and chaos. I tried to scream, but my voice was frozen in my throat. The laughter grew louder, more intense, until it became a cacophony of sound that threatened to consume me whole. I felt myself being pulled down into the depths of insanity, where the rational and the irrational existed side by side. The world around me began to distort and twist, like a funhouse mirror reflecting my own fragmented psyche. Colors bled together, shapes morphed into others, and time itself seemed to lose all meaning. I was trapped in a never-ending loop of terror, with no escape from the madness that surrounded me. The figure's laughter grew louder still, until it became a deafening roar that filled my entire being. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The laughter ceased, the colors ceased to blend, and time itself snapped back into focus. I was left lying on the ground, gasping for air, with no memory of how I had gotten there. But as I looked up at the figure standing before me, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Its eyes were no longer glowing with an otherworldly light. Instead, they were filled with a deep sadness, a sense of loss and longing that seemed to pierce my very soul. As I gazed into the figure's eyes, I saw a glimmer of recognition. It was as if it knew me, knew my deepest fears and desires. The sadness in its eyes seemed to deepen, and I felt a pang of empathy that I couldn't explain. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. The figure took a step closer, its movements slow and deliberate. I could feel its hot breath on my skin, and I knew I was being pulled into some kind of dark vortex. My mind began to fray, threads of sanity unraveling like a tapestry torn apart by an invisible hand. I saw visions of my childhood, of loved ones lost and forgotten memories that I thought were mine alone. The figure's eyes seemed to be watching me, waiting for me to unravel completely. And then, just as I was about to break, it spoke. Its voice was like a rusty gate scraping against the sides of my mind. "You're not who you think you are," it said. "You're not even human." The words cut through me like a knife, leaving a wound that would never heal. I felt myself dissolving into nothingness, my identity shattered by the figure's cruel revelation. And when I looked up, I saw that the world around me had changed. Everything was twisted and distorted, like a funhouse mirror reflecting my own broken psyche. The figure stood before me, its eyes blazing with an otherworldly intensity. "Welcome to your true self," it said, its voice dripping with malevolence. And with that, everything went black. As I lay there, I felt a presence behind me. I turned to see the figure from before standing in the doorway, its eyes fixed on me with an unblinking gaze. The air around us seemed to grow colder, as if the very fabric of reality was being drawn into this dark and twisted realm. The figure began to move towards me, its pace slow and deliberate. I could feel its malevolent energy washing over me, like a wave of darkness that threatened to consume me whole. As it drew closer, I saw that it was no longer alone. Behind it, A procession of twisted and corrupted individuals moved in lockstep, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. They were the product of some unholy union, forged from the darkest corners of human depravity and madness. The figure reached out a hand and touched my forehead, and I felt a surge of visions flood my mind. I saw the birth of this twisted world, the moment when humanity had turned to darkness and corruption. I saw the figure's true form, a monstrous creature with wings that seemed to stretch on forever. And I saw the union itself, a dark and ancient ritual that had brought about this unholy convergence of human and monster. The visions ended as suddenly as they began, leaving me gasping for breath. The figure leaned in close, its voice barely above a whisper. "You are one of us now," it said. "You are a part of this union, bound to it by ties of blood and madness." As it spoke, the world around me began to shift and distort, like a funhouse mirror reflecting my own shattered psyche. I knew that I was trapped in this twisted realm, forever bound to the whims of this unholy union.